And now, all the way from the other side of the pond, it's the Tea Party Power Hour with Mark Gillar.
Welcome to the Tea Party Power Hour. My name is Mark Gillar. I want to give a special shout out to all our friends in the UK or on the other side of the pond. Today, our guest is none other than Daniel Jupp. He is a British author and a political commentator based in Essex, England. He is from a working-class family and has a long-standing interest in U.S. politics, developed during his master's and Ph.D. study at the University of Essex. He is a conservative patriot, which we always like to hear here on the Tea Party Power Hour, and is a regular contributor to Country Squire magazine and has also been published by the U.S. Spectator, Spiked, and Politicalite. He formerly co-hosted a popular politics show on Expat Radio and is currently a regular guest on the Liberty Block podcast. His previous book, A Gift for Treason, The Cultural Marxist Assault on Western Civilization, was published in 2019, but he's here to talk to us about his just-released book, The Gates of Hell, Why Bill Gates is the Most Dangerous Man in the World. Daniel, welcome to the Tea Party Power Hour.
Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here.
You're our first guest from the UK on the currently revamped, new and improved Tea Party Power Hour, so we're very pleased to have you here. Now, again, the title of the book is Gates of Hell, Why Bill Gates is the Most Dangerous Man in the World. You begin this book with a mean-spirited, vicious, vile attack on this poor soul, Bill Gates. It was nasty, it was mean, it was cruel-hearted. In fact, so much so, Daniel, that I know my audience would love to hear some of that because, frankly, you're our kind of people.
Well, yeah, I do start with a description of Bill Gates' appearance that isn't all that flattering, and it's probably a little bit hypocritical given my appearance. But I do start by talking about him as the classic nerd, and the archetype of what everyone would expect a nerd to look like, and it not being all that pleasant. I think I describe him as clammy. Amongst other things.
Oh, there were a lot of other things in there. I couldn't stop laughing. Okay, so you begin with this classic description of Bill Gates as a nerd. I don't think there's anybody in their right mind that would challenge you on that. But how is that relevant? I mean, some people are going to say you were just being mean.
Well, to be honest, I was indulging myself and being mean there a little bit, but I think that the book as a whole doesn't take the tack of assuming anything about Gates, but I do try to dive into the psychology a little bit. So I don't automatically accept the idea that Bill Gates is a psychopath who deliberately wants to kill people, which, some people advocate. And I thought it was fairest to go between both those kind of most negative portrayals and the most positive portrayals, and kind of pick my way through them and see what the evidence supported most. So I don't think that the book as a whole isn't a hatchet job. It's a description of why this man is dangerous on rational grounds. But as far as his appearance goes, I sort of tried to draw people in with a light-hearted beginning, really. And I was making the point that, psychology is important and appearance affects psychology. And there's a sense with Gates that this is a massive example of Revenge of the Nerds being played out over an entire lifetime. And, there's a cultural phenomenon as well, where it's a cultural phenomenon, but we live in the age of the nerd. We live in the age where people who might have had sand kicked in their faces in previous generations are now some of the most powerful and richest people on the planet. And it's always been the case that kind of intellectual people can get to positions of authority, but the kind of computing revolution really speeded that and made it much more of a relevant thing for all of us to consider.
Now, as you said, the entire book is not a hatchet job, although I've got to be honest, the intro with the physical description kind of makes you think it's going there, but it doesn't end up It doesn't end up going there, and it's actually, I think, very fair, because you do mention throughout the book what other people think of him, especially the people that he pays money to. But I'm sorry. Your book is really funny. I appreciate your sense of humor and the way you handled it with Bill Gates. But more importantly than his physical appearance, which I think all will admit would classify him as being an extra on Big Bang Theory or in the movie series Revenge of the Nerds or whatever it was, the Nerd series. I don't know what you call that. The bottom line is you go into the psychology as well. Now, everybody likes to say that they're self-made. Everyone likes to do that. Donald Trump likes to do it, despite the wealthy family he was born into.
Yeah.
So, and I like Trump, but Bill Gates really is not a self-made man. It's not a rags to riches story, is it?
No, it's a riches to incredible riches story. And that's fair enough. I'm not left wing, so I don't despise people for being wealthy or being successful, and I don't see anything good coming out of that kind of thinking. But it has been portrayed as if on occasion that Bill Gates revolutionized computing and came out of nowhere, and that's all testament to his genius. And the reality is that when he set up Microsoft, he had a $1 million trust fund to fall back on if anything went wrong. And, he came from a very privileged family, one of the most respected families in Seattle. His mother is particularly interesting because she was involved with philanthropy through her whole life. And obviously Bill's interest in philanthropy and the Gates Foundation partly derives from his mother's influence, I think. So he had an extraordinarily privileged background, and it did definitely help him in his progress at various points. I mean, early on in Microsoft, he got a sweetheart deal effectively with IBM, and his mother was on a board with John Opel, the IBM CEO. So, that they personally knew people who were helpful to his progress. And he talks about having the governor over to discuss politics at their breakfast table in his household. So this was a very influential family, a very connected family.
Oh, I know you're in the UK, but that's pretty common in America. The governor comes over to my house all the time. It's just, we have breakfast, lunch, we eat popcorn during football games. If it's not one governor, it's another. It's my front door.
Yeah, I mean, I have the prime minister over to my tiny flat all the time.
Yeah, my front door is a revolving door for governors from various states. I'm actually in Texas, and Governor Abbott. I mean, there are times I pretend I'm not home because he just comes over so often. But
they're so needy, these politicians.
These governors, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
No, I love this journey into his background because it gives us some idea of who he is. Now, in the book, you mentioned that how can I put this? He was a very sophisticated young man. At a very young age, he was reading business magazines, and he was very, very skilled at mathematics. And you talk about when he was in college, one of his favorite little games was correcting his math professors. And at one point he thought about going into mathematics, but you said he chose not to do it because he wasn't the best person at his university, which I believe was Harvard, at mathematics. So if he couldn't be the best, he didn't want to do it. And that gave us some insight into his highly competitive nature. Like so many billionaires out there, this guy doesn't like to just win. He likes to win big.
Oh, absolutely. And, that factors in a lot of the problems about Bill Gates and his influence, really, because he's extraordinarily competitive, and he'll say that himself. He's ferociously bright, and he's very, very driven. Now, all of those things are positive qualities when, applied to something that is worthwhile. And on the surface, all of his aims and intentions would seem incredibly worthwhile. Nobody's going to object to saving lives of malnourished children or, educating people better or genuinely perfecting treatments for illnesses and viruses. All of that would seem very, very noble on the surface. But all of it is also stuff that he profits from. And all of it is he's driven for everyone to accept his way of doing it. And regardless of risk, he's privileged background means that he's never really risked failure in the way that an ordinary person would. And he's gotten very little sense of risk as a possibility. And this is what becomes very, very dangerous when you apply that to things like global health policy, for instance, because, the methodology that he created for Microsoft was capture market share quickly by rushing out a product And then if there's any problems with that product, you do a patch or you do a 2.0, and that solves the problem. And you've already got that market share, and you've ruthlessly acquired that market share, by the monopolistic ways you treat your competitors. But you can't do that sort of stuff with human health. You cannot patch up someone who's been injured by an experimental mRNA vaccine that has more adverse effects than you acknowledged. There isn't a bit of tech that you can immediately put in place that will solve the problems that you created there. And this is the danger. And he operates on such a vast scale. He operates globally. So when you're talking about putting things into the arms of half the population of the planet, or you're talking about geoengineering the climate of the entire planet, as one of the projects he supports suggests doing, then your potential risks are enormous. And that driven, very focused, but also very blinkered drive to success that Bill Gates has can be incredibly risky and dangerous for others.
I agree with you 100%. I actually, it seems like another life at this point, but I was the marketing director for an internet company. And one of the big jokes around that place, they both sold computers, fixed computers. They offered internet service locally. And one of the big jokes was at Microsoft, quality is job 1.1. And it was a joke about the fact that Microsoft, as you said, had a tendency to just throw something out there and worry about the problems later. As you said, they could always do some kind of a patch. But if you take Bill Gates' vaccine and you develop myocarditis, you can't put out vaccine 1.1 and fix that.
Exactly. There's no solution for you once that's happened to you. And Bill Gates seems to have very little awareness of that fact. And the fact is that, he's always been someone who wants to get to the solution as quickly as possible. And that served him very well in computing, but it doesn't serve anyone very well in human health when you really need long-lasting and vigorous safety procedures. You don't need your product rushed out as fast as possible.
I agree with you. And of course, in the case of Bill Gates, you did a good job of pointing out what a bully he is. I'm 60 years old. I'm old enough to remember Netscape and WordPerfect and Lotus. And what I know is that because he had the operating system, of course, with Windows, he was able to bundle that with his version, Explorer, Word, Excel. And even though they were far inferior products at the time, Netscape was a much better browser than Internet Explorer. WordPerfect, I thought in the beginning, was better than Word. And then he threw his products out first. He bundled them with the operating system. And over time, these products that he put out became much better. But had he not controlled the operating system and had he not been able to bundle the products with the operating system, Netscape would have destroyed Explorer. WordPerfect would have destroyed Word. I'm not sure about Lotus. Wasn't a big fan. But the bottom line is that he used his monopoly power. He used the power of having the operating system that was on everybody's PC, and he took great advantage of that. So the guy was a bully, but getting back into his psychology just a little bit, he had no empathy, no sympathy for anyone who had an illness. And whether it was Paul Allen or, there was a guy in his company that had a heart attack that he wanted to fire. He wanted to get rid of somebody who was recovering from cancer. I mean, is this the same guy who wants to make sure the children in India don't get polio? Because it sounds like two different people. I mean, will the real Bill Gates please stand up? Who is this?
Yeah, absolutely. I do talk about, I have a chapter called The Boss is a Bastard. And there are multiple accounts of him being just about the definition of a nightmare boss. And to be fair to him, he does talk about this himself as well, and he has mentioned it. But it's kind of clever manipulation of reality, really, the way he talks about it, because he kind of laughs it off as, yes, I was a bit of a horrid boss. but I'm a reformed character and now I'm saving the world. Well, that's all well and good, but the people who were damaged by that behaviour were still damaged by it.
Is that a PR? Is that a PR campaign, or is this man made a genuine transformation? It's hard to know what's in someone's heart, but what do you think?
Exactly, and if one of the other chapters deals with the similarities between himself and the founders of the Rockefeller dynasty. And, the fact one of the things he read about quite often when he was young was information on Rockefeller that he was fascinated with. And, he faced very similar condition to Rockefeller, which was a kind of massive dent in public perception and popularity based on controversy and antitrust laws, effectively. And so when Microsoft had built up a reputation that wasn't necessarily a good one, of monopolistic practices, Bill Gates was in trouble, effectively, just as Rockefeller had been in trouble with Standard Oil when some of its practices were exposed. And the solution that he followed was exactly the same one that the Rockefeller dynasty followed, which was to move into philanthropy and, to transfer most of his energy and attentions from building up a business empire to using the proceeds of that business empire to build a philanthropic empire. So that's when the Gates Foundation was born. It was immediately after a very negative judgment against him in terms of the monopolistic practices of the Microsoft Corporation. So there's an extent to which one has to wonder if all of this process was about saving his reputation initially and then extending his power in ways that maybe don't have as much oversight over them as the practices of a company has, because a foundation obviously isn't bound by the same rules.
I find the timing very coincidental, to say the least, and I want to dive a little bit more into Bill Gates' psychology, but first we have to do a little business to keep the lights on. So if you'll give us just a moment, we're going to have a commercial break, and we will be right back. And we are back with Daniel Jupp. He is the author of Gates of Hell, Why Bill Gates is the Most Dangerous Man in the World. Daniel, we were talking about the psychology of Bill Gates. And I'd like to go back into some other stuff in the book, because you put some stuff in here that I've never heard about him. So maybe, at least in my case, his PR campaign was working. You mentioned that Bill Gates would actually memorize the license plates of his employees when Microsoft was still small enough that he could do that, so that he could look out into the parking lot and see who was arriving on time and who was late. He also memorized all their phone numbers. I mean, is that the habit of a well person?
No, it's not, is it at all? I mean, it is. If you wanted to describe a stalker, that would be a good place to start, wouldn't it? And it's astonishing, really, that obviously there was a different business climate then, but even by the standards of the 70s or the 80s, your boss memorising your number plates and kind of lying in wait to see what time you left the car park would be considered very weird behaviour. And it was. So, this is not a standard guy. This is a guy who thinks in a very unique ways. Let's put it that way. Sure
sounds like it. I've never heard of anyone doing that. I mean, I'm surprised he didn't stand, make them all use punch cards and on a time machine and stand there at the machine while they checked in the morning. I mean, this guy, to say that he had high expectations in terms of the amount of hours worked, I think would be an understatement based on what you said in the book. Now, here are a couple things that you might find interesting, and they come from my background. I told you that I had worked for a computer company involved in the internet and some other things. The topic of Bill Gates came up one day, in addition to making the joke about it, Microsoft Quality is Job 1.1. The owner of this company I worked for, his name was Jeff. He said, "Hey, Mark, I want to show you something." And we went to this site on the internet where you could look up and see various domain names and who owned them. So the first one we typed in was "It is futile to resist." That was owned by Microsoft. And my favorite one that we looked up was a domain billislord.com. And of course, and that was owned by Microsoft. So someone, and I'm not saying it was Bill Gates, but someone at Microsoft really captured the spirit of what that corporation was all about by registering these domain names. And one other thing.
That's wonderful. I hadn't heard that. I hadn't actually heard that.
I was there at that time. I think it was, good Lord, I want to say it was probably 1997 or so that you could still research those domain names, and they were owned by Microsoft. Now, here's my favorite thing that sort of gives us some insight into this guy's psychological profile. He had a standing agreement with his wife, Melinda, that he could spend 1 week a year with his ex-girlfriend.
Yeah. But I think that was less of an issue to her than the time that was spent with Epstein.
That's a whole other issue. That's a whole other issue. But I'm just saying, could you imagine? Are you married, Daniel?
Yes, I am. Yeah, very happily. Just in case your wife's listening.
Well, I've been happily married for 36 years, and I can tell you that if before the wedding day I had said, and by the way, honey, there's just one little thing. I've got this ex-girlfriend I just can't let go of. I mean, she's just too good in bed or whatever it is. And I'm going to need a week a year to hook up with her. You don't mind, do you, baby?
Just to get it out of my system.
I can't imagine any guy having the stones to do that. I mean, that is absolutely amazing, and I think gives us some incredible insight into this man. It's like,
it's another example of that extraordinary empathy.
It is. And again, that plays itself out again and again. Now, you mentioned the Jeffrey Epstein thing. I think this is as good a time to get into that as any, because we're talking about the psychology of this man, and we just mentioned Melinda, his wife of so many years. I think, was it 26, 27 years or something that they were actually married, and I know they dated a good while before that. I
mean, it's probably his relationship with Melinda, and there's still a relationship there, obviously, because they have children together, and they're both still on the board of the Gates Foundation, so trustees of the Gates Foundation. So Melinda was one of his longest human contacts of his entire life. And, very, very close, almost someone that could have been designed by committee to match the interests of Bill Gates. Bit of a computer nerd herself, very bright woman, had the same kind of philanthropic interests, and obviously that's what they developed through the Gates Foundation. But the strange thing with the Epstein connection is that Melinda Gates talks about disliking Epstein intensely, having a very visceral reaction to him, considering him a creep. And basically, the image you get from Melinda Gates is that she cottoned on to what kind of person Epstein was. And she didn't like him, and she reiterated this to Bill Gates. This is according to her accounts. Now, she was at the time his wife, longtime partner, mother of his children, and he kept his friendship with Epstein. Now, this is what paedophile manipulators do, that they will ingratiate themselves with people. And there are plenty of people in the UK, for example, who were befriended by Jimmy Savile, who were not themselves paedophiles. So, there might be people who are connected to Epstein who are not themselves of that nature. But it does seem strange that someone would prioritise that friendship above their relationship with their wife, who is their strongest ally in philanthropy, which is engaging most of his attention, and he's, long-time partner. If my wife was saying to me that one of my friends was a total creep, and he freaked her out, and she was worried about him, I would end the friendship. I think you would take that on board as a significant negative in your relationship with that person. But Bill's explanation for why he stayed friends with Epstein is one that I find very unconvincing, because he says that they were discussing charitable ventures. And it's true that Epstein had a small charity of his own, a kind of very tiny version of the Gates Foundation. but there's never any shared project between them. And this is years of friendship that was initiated after Epstein was already a convicted sex offender. So it's all stuff that, most people would say there's circumstantial evidence there, or there's certainly stuff to explain and worry about.
I think it's very, very telling that there is no, how can I put this? There is absolutely no, as you said, project anywhere that Bill Gates can point to and say, well, all those years of talking with Jeffrey Epstein, it finally came to fruition and we formed the following charity and here's all the good work we did.
Yeah.
But apparently all these guys ever did was talk about it. Apparently, occasionally, according to some people, on Epstein's island, which was filled with all these underage girls who were performing sexual acts on fully adult men. So, again, you don't want to do a guilt by association thing, but Bill Gates' explanation that they were just talking about philanthropic efforts doesn't really hold water. And it's certainly strange that whatever he had going with Epstein, it was more important to him than his relationship with his wife. And let's just say this and call it for what it is. How often do you hear of a married couple, breaking up and divorcing because the male refuses to break up a friendship with some guy who's been arrested for, I think soliciting sex with a minor is what the charge was. I think that was it. Epstein's dead, so he can't sue me anyway. But
yeah, this is the section where we have our lawyers.
Absolutely,
handy, obviously.
So it just doesn't seem right. I mean, what guy would go through a divorce because he doesn't want to break up a friendship with somebody that his only interaction is discussing charity activities?
Yeah, when he's getting those conversations from a lot of other people as well, and and there's a lot of other rich people. I mean, Bill Gates is the person who organised the Giving Pledge, and he's kind of best buddies with Warren Buffett as well, and. Bill Gates organised around 200 other very, very wealthy people, mostly billionaires, to say that they would give money away towards causes that Bill Gates believes in. So, that shows his level of charisma, if you like, which is unexpected given the nerdy stuff as well. But it shows his influence over other billionaires. Now, Epstein wasn't a billionaire. Epstein was a kind of millionaire, but he's nowhere in the league of those guys in terms of the wealth that he could bring to such projects. So this idea that they were solely discussing what Epstein could bring to these philanthropic efforts is a somewhat bizarre.
Well, I fully expect that our FBI here in America is going to release that client list just any day now.
Yeah, it's coming along with Biden's impeachment. It's any day now. But,
well, speaking of Bill Gates and his philanthropic efforts, the man is very, very smart, but there's one thing he doesn't seem to be able to do. And that's get rid of all his money. I mean, the man has been trying for years, and no matter what he does, and you do a great job of this in the book, no matter what he does, Daniel, he just keeps getting wealthier.
It's a terrible curse, isn't it? I mean, that poor man. And it's the same with Warren Buffett as well, who, both of them launched this Giving Pledge. And they said, we're going to give away the vast majority of our wealth. And both of them are significantly richer than when they said they were going to do that. And, Bill Gates has been giving money away, supposedly, through the foundation for 20 years. And he has given, billions of dollars away. But quite often this has been to schemes and causes which he's also invested in through the Bill Gates Trust. So he wears this kind of white hat where he says to government, look, I'm putting $500 million into this. You should put $500 million into this as well, because it's a wonderful cause. And government obediently says, OK, we'll do that. And they do, whether it's the Indian government or the British government or the German government or the US government. He's been very good at having personal relationships with world leaders and persuading them with no consultation with the public whatsoever to invest vast sums of money on, saving the world from a future pandemic, or developing a new vaccine, or developing artificial meats, or any of these things. And he gets the investment. He works in private-public partnership to get that investment from government. But he's also an investor himself in many of the companies that will then benefit from contracts that are then given to actually create the technology or deliver the products that are needed. So all of it is very circular. And as I say, his fortune has not been dented in the least by his philanthropic
If nothing,
efforts.
it sounds like it's been increased by his philanthropic efforts. That's the way it's looking. And
Yes.
let's talk about that specifically. Bill Gates was among those pushing the vaccines. How many different pharma companies was this guy holding a strong position with? I mean, I know I saw AstraZeneca in there, which is the UK. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, in the book, I list some of them. And it's true as well that he's divested himself at various stages, because we're talking over a 20-plus year period. So there's points at which he had more pharmaceutical holdings than he has now. But, I list out in the book a whole list of his investments as they stood at that moment. But there are examples, like, for example, where he's pressed the Indian government to invest in various pharmaceuticals or polio vaccines. They've been delivered through a foundation initiative across India, and he's been celebrating particular Indian-based vaccine developers. And these are people that he has invested in. So, it happens again and again. Now, I'm not aware, as of this instant, of the entirety of his holdings. I don't think anyone is, apart from Bill Gates himself. He might not even be aware of all of them, because it's a vast enterprise. The trust still holds billions and billions of dollars, and so does the foundation. And the foundation has links through all of the people that they have funded in research companies, in laboratories, all around the globe. And, the network is so enormous that tracing it at any one particular moment is a task that it's almost impossible now. This is a vast network of influence.
Sounds like the Biden family in a sense, but as you know, there's evidence, or supposedly evidence, that Ukraine paid Hunter and Joe Biden each $5 million, and the money was funneled through 10 banks and 20 shell companies. Now, I'm not saying that Bill Gates is engaging in taking bribes or giving bribes. I want to make that clear. But typically, people like having a network that is so convoluted that no one can make sense of it.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And he's got this cover of the foundation, which is that everything the foundation is doing is philanthropic, and it's for good, and it's for these good causes. But as I say, if you're pushing global health policy towards a certain direction because you're supplying between 11 and 13% of the funding of the World Health Organization every year, but you've also got investments that will directly benefit from a government saying, okay, we need a vaccine developed instantly and we need it for our entire population. That is a captured market in a sense. And, all of this circumvents democratic accountability again and again and again, because he does things through phone calls to world leaders that really should be things that are done by consultation and through a democratic process. Nobody puts these... When Bill Gates persuades a government to invest $500 million here or another, $500 million elsewhere, none of that is on the record. None of that is in the sense of, those conversations being logged and monitored and everyone knowing exactly what was said. These are all private conversations that then announce a massive change in funding.
One of the things that came to mind as you were doing a great job of explaining how Bill Gates' charity efforts actually end up lining his own pockets in the long run, or even the short run, is that Warren Buffett's kind of done the same thing. Just like Bill Gates, he's behind all this green stuff, this green initiative. So in the United States, we had Biden step in and cancel the Keystone Pipeline. Well, the Keystone Pipeline was going to bring oil from Canada into the United States, and now that the pipeline isn't happening, how will that oil be transported via train or via train? Who owns the trains? Warren Buffett. Yes.
Warren Buffett.
So here we have all these green zombies at the ground level saying, God bless Bill Gates. God bless Warren Buffett. You know, that Buffett, he's such a supporter of the green movement. And meanwhile, Buffett's looking at the bottom line of his train business and going, wow, man, we just cleaned up. It happens. I mean, these guys are clever. These green people are nothing more than pawns in the chess game that these people are playing.
Yeah, and there's some very strange things that have happened with the green movement. And I talk about green issues quite a lot in the book because, you know, as dangerous as the vaccines potentially are, there's also, you know, huge dangers with net zero policies. And Bill Gates is one of the world's strongest advocates of net zero. Now, in his own climate book, in his How to Avoid a Climate Catastrophe book, he admits that there's absolutely nothing in net zero that he knows for certain will solve climate change. So even if you consider it this enormous problem, he says that the climate change transitioning away from oil, for the entire world economy to transition away from oil is the most radical and enormous task that an economy has ever undertaken. More radical than kind of things like Soviet 5-year plans, for example. It's all directed from the top. It's all centralized planning, effectively. And, you know, we saw in the Soviet era just how badly wrong centralized planning of food, resources and energy can be, and how badly wrong it can go based on fake science or bad science or false science. You know, look up Lysenkoism. And the Soviets had this scientist who had a brilliant idea about crops and how they work and how to increase crop yields. And you know, they ended up with a famine, thanks to Lysenko, the scientist. And these are things that are potential problems with net zero, because net zero is not only saying radically alter your energy policies and go for these things which aren't very green in traditional terms. It's also saying radically alter your food policies at the same time, because Bill Gates has this idea, along with other advocates of net zero, that cow farts are destroying the planet.
Yeah.
You know, so we've got to transition away from meat. We've got to transition away from dairy. We've all got to radically alter our eating habits. And Bill Gates kind of discusses all this and dismisses it with the fact that, you know, as if it has no really big impact, because he says, well, you know, I like hamburgers and I'll have to eat a fewer hamburgers. Well, I think there's the thing that we've noticed with many of these elite directed measures, is that they don't abide by them themselves, and they'll still be eating steak when you're being told to eat insects. You know, they don't follow it themselves. You know, there's pictures of Bill Gates during the COVID pandemic where he's surrounded by servants who are masked and he isn't, and this was commonplace with lots of people who were very, very pro-mask during the COVID pandemic, and that's another policy that was pushed by Bill Gates. They don't follow it themselves. You know, the whole thing about, you know, Bill Gates' carbon footprint himself, which is absolutely enormous. And he says it's okay because, you know, I'm super rich. I can offset this by paying people to offset it. Well, sorry, no, that's just pure hypocrisy, because you are doing all the things that you are saying ordinary people shouldn't. So there's the hypocrisy issue there, but there's also the effectiveness issue, because lots of these green policies aren't very green and don't seem to work. And, you know, he's asking us to risk our entire economic structure for the most radical change we've ever seen, which could impoverish people, that could put, you know, thousands of people out of work, that could disrupt food supply. And he's saying, you know, we should do all this. Don't worry about it. It's not a risk. And that doesn't seem very convincing
Well,
to
the
me.
guy seems to be psychic because he invests in vaccines and pharmaceuticals, and there's a pandemic. He, as you pointed out in the book, he bought 269,000 acres of U.S. farmland, making him the biggest farmer in the United States. And then we're having food shortages. And, no matter what it is, he's saying that we need to get rid of cows because cow farts are going to release methane, I guess it is, and then that's going to cause global warming.
Yeah.
And by the way, when we can't eat cow meat, who's got a solution? Bill Gates is working on artificial meat. I mean, the guy is always there to clean up after one of his philanthropic efforts creates a need. It's amazing how that seems to work. I don't know if you're familiar with the Irish filmmaking duo of Phelim McAleer and Anne McElhaney, but they put out a movie once called Not Evil, Just Wrong. And it was a movie about all of the harm being caused by environmental efforts, not just the global warming thing, but a lot of different environmental efforts. They went around the world showing people that had been damaged by this. I mean, for example, there's the whole issue of DDT being banned because of the book Silent Spring, which apparently Al Gore's mother read to him while he was in high school, but before he went to bed each night. I'm not making that up. I'm not making that up. He claims his mother read to him from Silent Spring every night before he went to bed. And then we looked up the publishing date.
Another completely normal family background there.
A boy in high school and his mom comes in, "Hey, Al, it's time for mommy to read you a bedtime story from Silent Spring." Yeah, that happens all the time, especially with boys that are in high school. I know my mother came in and read to me every night during that time. So, I mean, they're all hypocrites. I mean, Al Gore doesn't even shut his lights off on Earth Day, which is something he encourages other people to do. I still remember Phelim McAleer going to, I want to say it was the climate summit in Copenhagen, and he was actually in a polar bear costume chasing Al Gore around trying to get a comment. But I remember once he asked, I think her name is Gillian Anderson, I'm not 100% sure, but she was on the X-Files, and he went to some climate summit, and he was asking her, "How did you get here?" "Well, I flew." "Well, why did you take a plane?" And she in a very smart-ass fashion said, "Because it was too far to swim." Of course, the point being, if CO2 is so bad, why didn't you guys just have a Zoom meeting or a Skype meeting or whatever? And yeah, all of these people are like that. I think Harrison Ford, the American actor, which I'm sure you're familiar with, he is a big global warming guy. Yet he'll slip up and tell a story about how there's this little hamburger place that he loves. So when he's hungry, he'll hop in his plane and fly down the coastline and get himself a hamburger from this one particular spot. And then somebody said, "Well, you're a big anti-CO2 guy. Isn't that kind of irresponsible given your stance on global warming?" And he quipped back, "I'll start walking everywhere when all the other people do." Yeah, that's not the point. Sir, the point is that you tell people to conserve CO2, but you're a rich guy, so you'll hop in your airplane and fly down the coast to get a hamburger at some joint you like. And it's okay for you to do that. I guess like Bill Gates, he can pay the carbon offsets. But all of these people are hypocrites. I don't care who they are. Leonardo DiCaprio, you name it. This Tinseltown, these Hollywood types especially, they'll sit there and advocate all this stuff, and then they break all the rules. I remember there was some Olympic star that got roped into PETA, which does not stand for people eating tasty animals, but actually people for the ethical treatment of animals. And then some enterprising young filmmakers followed her around for a while and eventually got a video of her walking out of a hamburger joint eating a hamburger. And they were like, "Hey, you're a spokesperson for PETA. Should you be eating a hamburger?" And she explained that she was new to PETA and didn't really know all the I just started. Yeah, I didn't know. I didn't know that wasn't allowed. It's like, oh my gosh. So yeah, you make a strong point. Is Bill Gates a hypocrite for having his stance? Yeah,
Oh, he's absolutely a hypocrite, and as you say, as all of them are. And I think it's part of being utterly divorced from ordinary experience and ordinary lives that they're very easy to that they find it very easy to sign a blank check with other people's money for a start, the burden on the taxpayer. And they find it very easy to demand sacrifices that they won't be making themselves, and they feel incredibly virtuous doing this. It makes them feel good about themselves. They're saving the planet. But what they're actually doing in the first instance is making ordinary people's lives considerably more miserable. And, for no guaranteed reward. That's the thing, because they won't abide by it themselves. So there's the hypocrisy there. But worse than that, they don't actually know that any of this stuff will work. And all the evidence that there is showing us that it won't work. For example, all the kind of net zero demands that are made. Well, during COVID, lots of places shut down their economic activity. And there was far less man-made CO2 being pumped into the atmosphere. Did it make any change to global average temperatures whatsoever? No, it didn't. Of course it didn't. And, there was a huge economic shutdown globally in that period, and it had absolutely no effect whatsoever of the type they're saying the massive transition in our economy will affect. So they've got evidence that this stuff doesn't work in the first instance, and yet they still demand it. And they also know that it'll be ruinous for many lives. One of the examples I cite in the book is about Dutch farmers. Dutch government demanding that 3,000 Dutch farming families, vacate their homes, have their homes seized, no longer work in the traditional manner that they have. And these are lives ruined. These are ordinary lives being ruined by a green demand. And it's also, Holland was disproportionately a supplier of food to other nations. Their farming industry is incredibly efficient and very well run. And they were saying to these farmers, we're going to seize your homes, seize your farms, force you out. And the EU was saying at the same time, we're not going to allow you to farm anywhere else in Europe. So they were hugely impacting these people's lives. And there were protests about it, understandably. Now, the farmers in Holland did a very wise thing and formed their own political party, which was quite successful in the last elections, I've heard. But again and again, we see these people making demands for policies that they don't know will work, justified supposedly on some premise of saving the world. But there's no justification that they can actually prove that this will do the thing they say it will do. But it does make them a lot of money, because they're the people demanding this are also the people investing in the new green energy or the new meat sources or whatever it is they're saying we need to transition to. And it's incredibly selfish, it's incredibly destructive, and it's incredibly short-sighted in everything except making money for them.
Oh, right. And, you point out in the book that Bill Gates was saying countries should move away from prioritizing their own citizens. There should be a transference of wealth. That America is just supposed to give away all of this money to these other countries. But isn't it interesting that Bill Gates, the one thing he adheres to, and you point this out brilliantly in the book, is that he's quite fond of intellectual property laws. He hasn't gone to these third world countries and said, you know what, you can have Windows for free, you can have Word for free, Excel for free. I think it's called Microsoft Edge now, for free. He's not that generous when it comes to his own business efforts and things that directly impact him. But he does want the American taxpayer to pay. And it's interesting because he says, well, America is this wealthy nation, and it is. But there are plenty of people, especially under the Biden administration, that are struggling, that are suffering. We need to take care of our own people first, as I'm sure you agree that you do in the UK. Why in the world do we need to make the American taxpayer suffer more because Bill Gates, again, the man that's always in a hurry, as you put it, says that that's what we should do? Who in the hell is he? He hasn't been elected to anything. he's completely, as you point out in the book, circumventing the process of politics and people representing the voters. I mean, he's doing an end around on that. It's like, I'm Bill Gates, I'm the fourth wealthiest man in the world, and this is what I'm going to do. He doesn't give it.
Yeah, and I think it's a direct contradiction. It's a direct insult to what a government should be. When he's getting government to enact policies like this, and when he's saying that actually it's your job not to spend on America, not to improve American education, not to improve opportunities for American citizens, your job is to save Africa and to spend all that money there. Well, that's not. That is definitely not the job of a nation state. A nation state exists for its own citizens and for their protection and for their well-being. And your political representatives are supposed to be representing you. Africa's political representatives are supposed to be representing them. India's political representatives are supposed to be representing them. You cannot say to a population, we're going to take all your taxes and we're going to spend them somewhere else, because that's theft.
I'd like to end the show with something very personal. You pointed out that a lot of these people that have been hurt, especially during the pandemic, by these policies that Bill Gates and Dr. Fauci were pushing, they can't be unhurt. You can't just say, well, we'll put a patch on that and we'll do pandemic 1.1 or 2.0 or whatever. And you told a story in the book of your mom passing away in April of 2020 and how you weren't always able to visit her. I want to share with you that my father died in July of 2020, and I know exactly what you went through. My father was in and out of the hospital in 2020 with heart failure until he eventually died at the end of July in 2020. And I know what it's like to have a parent who's dying in the hospital, and they're telling you you can't get in unless they're about to die. You can't visit them unless we believe they are about to die. And this is very personal, but I'm going to share it anyway for the first time on the air. My father was in the hospital, and when he would go into the hospital, he would suffer dementia. He would not oftentimes know where he was or understand why he was there. He would have hallucinations. And one night, in an attempt to calm him down, my father called me at home, and he was having, the nurses explained he was having this hallucination that his room was on fire. And Daniel, he was begging me, Mark, please come to the hospital. This place is on fire and no one will put it out. I need your help. Please come to the hospital. These people around me won't do anything to put out the fire. And I was trying to explain to him that the medicine he was taking was making him see things that weren't really there and all this stuff. And he just kept asking me to come to the hospital. And I asked the nurses, is there any way I can come to the hospital right now? He needs me there to calm him down. And they said, sorry, sir, there are no exceptions. So when did I get to see him? When he was dying. And I got a phone call from my mother saying, they said Dad's dying. He's having multiple heart attacks. Then I was able to go there, but I couldn't go in because they were working on him. So the next time I saw my father, he was dead. And I have to live for the rest of my life with the fact that he was on the phone pleading with me to come to the hospital. And thanks to these stupid lockdown laws, which didn't benefit anyone, and these stupid policies by the hospital, my last memory of my father is him begging me to come to the hospital to help him. And they absolutely, no matter how much I begged, the hospital staff would not let me do it. So that is emotional damage. I'm going to carry that scar. I'm going to carry that scar with me for the rest of my life. And there's nothing that Bill Gates or Dr. Fauci can do to take that horrible memory from me. And more importantly than how it affected me, I mean, who cares how it affected me? How it affected my father, who was in the hospital wanting to see his son and was being told that he couldn't. Can you imagine that being one of the final days of your life?
Yeah, well, that's horrific suffering. That's horrific suffering that needn't have happened.
No, not at all.
You know, your father might have experienced that, but the fact that you weren't allowed to comfort him and to be with him is, I think, a moral obscenity. And it's, thank you for sharing that. And it's very moving, very horrific story. But I had very similar with my mother. I know that she suffered alone, frightened, dying, and myself and my sister were prevented from being with her and comforting her. And by the time she came home, she was paralyzed and she couldn't communicate.
Oh no!
And we suspect that she had a stroke in hospital as well and fell off her hospital bed. And we don't know how long she was left on the floor. We don't know, what happened to her, because we were not allowed to visit. We had some visits in, I think, the second week that she was in. We were allowed none in the first week. And, that is a horrific experience that we went through,
Yes.
like the one you went through with your father. And millions of other families went through this.
Yes.
You know, I saw grotesque footage at the time of the pandemic of couples separated, elderly couples separated in nursing homes. I saw women begging to see their parents who were, they were prevented from seeing, who were in nursing homes. At the same time, they were putting people in nursing homes who had COVID and infecting those very vulnerable people with COVID, whilst preventing their loved ones who didn't have COVID from seeing them. None of that made any sense. All of it was insane. All of it was cruel.
There were 5
and these
states,
policies-
if I could jump in for a second, there were 5 states,
Sure.
5 states that misinterpreted that. I think what the law was, or the order was originally meant to do, was to keep nursing homes from kicking out people who contracted COVID. But instead, 5 governors started placing people with COVID who hadn't even been in the nursing home to begin with into those nursing homes, and a lot more people died. And if you want to talk about horrific, there is a horrific video coming out of Michigan, which we all know is a blue state, and that video shows a young man in his 20s videotaping himself beating the crap out of senior citizens in that nursing home. He would just go into a room and begin punching them in the face. That gentleman was put in that nursing home because he had COVID. Still waiting on Governor Whitmer to explain why she thought that was a good idea. But it was happening in New Jersey. It was happening in New York. It was happening in Illinois. It was happening in Michigan. It was happening in California. And these were all stupid left-wing Democrat governors who thought the meaning of the order was not that you couldn't kick out a patient who had COVID, but that you were supposed to start sending your COVID patients there. That, despite all the temporary hospitals, frankly, even the hospitals weren't overbooked. That was always a lie about the hospitals not having any vacancy. But, you had hospital ships in New York and California, and you had all these temporary makeshift hospitals that were set up. Those people in those blue states could have been sent to something like that. They didn't have to be sent to a nursing home. But again, and I'll even send you the footage over Skype. This is the kind of thing that was happening. Could you imagine, with what we went through, how much worse it would have been if we would have seen video of your mother or my father being beaten about the face by some 20-year-old kid who was put in the nursing home because he had COVID. I mean, this is the kind of craziness that took place. There was one guy and his daughter who decided they couldn't stand being inside anymore, and they went out for a short ride, just the two of them, the way it had been in their house. And the father was arrested for violating the rules in place during COVID. During this time, you got a clear picture of what the Democrat Party was about and what the Republican Party was about. They were bathing in the power. I mean, they were drunk
They delighted in the power of it, and they were authoritarians, and it was absolutely callous and cruel and unnecessary, all of it. You know, and there's things like you know, the lockdowns are linked to a rise in the number of children who died because they were in abusive families, and people were prevented from stopping that abuse happening because of rules on movement around, rules on you know, being confined to your home. They weren't going into schools, these children, and we had, you know, I mentioned a very, very horrific case in the UK where you know, an innocent child was beaten to death, suffered months of prior abuse, and that was then beaten to death. And that in that particular case, there was a family relative who tried to see the child and was prevented from doing so by the police because of COVID lockdown rules. You know, so there are people who died because of those rules, and those rules did not stop the spread of COVID. You know, the transmission rates weren't affected by those rules. Everywhere, every nation, no matter how harsh their measures, experienced COVID. So it did absolutely nothing to stop it. But what it did allow, what it created, was opportunities for politicians to be authoritarian dictators, and opportunities for abusers to, you know, carry on abusing without any interruption, and you know, huge amounts of cruelty to take place. And this is all stuff that people deserve to be punished for now. These are policies that were hideous, absolutely hideous in their effects, and you know, should never have been allowed, should never have been condoned, and were all being pushed by Bill Gates amongst others.
And we saw during that time an increase in child abuse, an increase in spousal abuse, an increase in drug use,
Yes.
an increase in alcoholism, an increase in suicide. Absolutely horrible effects that accomplished absolutely nothing, nothing whatsoever. You know, you've been very generous with your time today, Daniel, and we've gone way over on time, but I've certainly enjoyed the conversation. I have one last
Yeah.
question for you. It's the last question I ask all my guests. Where can people buy your book?
Okay, much as I hate to support another billionaire, it's on Amazon. So just type in Daniel Jupp, or type in Gates of Hell with my name. That's Jupp, by the way, for those who don't know. Yeah, it's on Amazon. It's available from my publishers, Post Hill Press, as well. And it should be, you know, something that you can find quite easily from most booksellers because it's only just out.
Let's give a shout out to Post Hill Press. They publish a lot of books that other publishers wouldn't touch, and it's because of publishers like Post Hill Press that someone like you can write a book telling a very important story. So, Daniel, I want to thank you for being here today. I've enjoyed the conversation beyond my ability to describe how much I enjoyed it. And I wish you much success with this book and any other books you write in the future. And more importantly, hopefully, hopefully, at some point, the people will take back the power and the people will be governed by people who are working for the people and not for people like Bill Gates. So thank you for bringing all of this to our attention. Very enlightening, and I hope to have you back sometime because, believe it or not, I only got through half my questions. So
Yeah, well, that might be me being long-winded in my responses. I don't know, but thank you very much for having me, and you know, may I offer my sincere condolences on your loss as well, because that's a very moving story, and you know, but it's one that will have been repeated for many other people, I think, in various ways, and you know, we shouldn't allow evil like this, and we shouldn't accept it as a good or claim that the good intentions supposed good intentions excuse it, because they don't.
We're going to have to dig into this another time, Daniel. So I'm going to put you on our regular guest list and invite
Oh, that's great.
and invite you back very, very soon, because I want to dig into this stuff some more. We didn't begin to scratch the surface of your book. I don't want to go through every page of the book, because then people wouldn't need to buy it. But I do feel like there's a lot more here we can discuss. And if I can borrow a term from the opening of the show, it's always nice to touch base with people on the other side of the pond and compare notes. So we want to have you back to do that. Once again, Daniel Jupp, the author of Gates of Hell, Why Bill Gates is the Most Dangerous Man in the World, available through Amazon. Just go in and type in Gates of Hell and Daniel Jupp, Jupp, and you'll be able to get your own copy. So once again, Daniel, thanks for being here.
Thanks very much for having me, Mark.
You know it. And I'm serious about what I'm saying. You will be invited back, and I hope you accept.
I will do. Thanks very much. I've enjoyed the conversation.
I have too, immensely. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day, sir.
Cheers. You too, Mark. Bye-bye.
I want to thank everyone for joining us today and remind you that Christmas will be here before you know it. So if you're looking for that perfect stocking stuffer to give the MAGA person on your list, go no further than TeaPartyPowerHour.com, where we have a great selection of silver Trump coins. These are 99.9% silver Trump coins depicting various important moments from his presidency and his life. Also, want to remind you, if you want to get a copy of our newsletter, we don't charge anything for that. Just go to your phone and type in TEA. Text that to 44144. Once again, go to your phone, type the word, or I should say text the word T, that's TEA, to 44144. Also, no matter what player you're listening on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Pandora, Amazon Music, Spotify, whatever it is, don't forget to hit that follow button, because that way you'll get a notification anytime we put out a new episode. So thank you again for being here. And like I said, we look forward to talking with you again very soon.
You've been listening to the Tea Party Power Hour with Mark Gillar.